All right, so the first thing I want to talk about, Kyra, could you repeat the question that you had earlier?
Oh, well, with the tag,
Yeah.
I usually do the get element by tag ID, but you can do it by the selector too.
Yeah. But you were asking about get elements by tag name and get elements by class name, I think are some of them. And some of you guys use those in your projects. Get elements by tag name and get elements by class name. They, like, Marin, I think it was you, where we had, like, some sort of weird error using it, right?
Yeah, I got all sorts of errors.
Oh. All right. That's not what I was going for. But with get elements by class name and get elements by tag name, it doesn't always work quite right. So that's why we put these four, well, really these three, because inner HTML doesn't select anything. Just these three up here, that's why we put those on there. If you're going to select things in vanilla JavaScript, we strongly recommend using these three instead of some of the other ones, because those other ones sometimes don't work, but these always do. So there's that. And then Jeff and Max in the back, can you tell me what the difference is between query selector and query selector all?
Query selector will select the first element that matches, and query selector all gets them all.
Yeah, exactly right. So query selector will always return one thing, and query selector all will always return an array. So that's the difference between those two. But let's take a look at this. Let's see. Charles, can you tell me how to do the first one in vanilla.js?
Yes, so it's
Whoops.
query selector.
Sorry, I wrote Koduman. Okay, query selector. Yeah, all right, let's find out. And there it is. Cool, nicely done. So that's number one. How about number two? Is it Matt?
Yeah.
Matt?
It's the same thing except it's query selector all.
Yep. So query selector all, and that returns every single A on the page. How about number three? Ken, you want to try that one? Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, sure. I'm not going to do that actually. I'm just going to do document get element by ID because that's all we were looking for there. You can also do this with query selector. Did anyone try it that way? Christine, did you?
Yes.
So how would I have done that?
Document.query selector, parentheses, ~,
Yeah, exactly. So this is how you would select something by its ID with CSS, with #logo. So that's how we do it with query selector as well. Selector comes from CSS. In CSS, we have selectors, and that's why it's called query selector. Okay, thank you. How about number 4? Keith? Yes. Okay, cool.
It's query selector all open close dot post.
Post. Looks pretty good. All right, and how about just the first thing with the class of post? Caitlin?
Document query selector dot post.
Yep, so I'm going to do the same thing, just remove post. All right, so how about the second element with class post? Who wants to try that one? Yeah?
So we did document dot query selector hash mark or whatever #blog dot child nodes in bracket.
Wow,
Oh.
that's one way of doing it. Not quite what I'm looking for though. Yeah, Christine?
Well, query selector all returns an array, so
Mhm.
we access the first index of that array. So document.query selector all, and then post, and then the index is 0.
There we go. Well, that's going to return the first one. If I wanted the second one,
Oh, second one,
then,
excuse me, one, sorry.
yeah, exactly. So this returns an array, so I can use brackets to get the second thing in the array. So remember, the second thing is number 1, the first thing is number 0. That's why you see those mugs like world's number 0 programmer. So this is like nerd humor. All right, how about the last one, the HTML content of the first P on the page? Kyra?
What I did for that was document.querySelector and parentheses and quotations P
Mhm.
dot inner HTML.
All right, let's find out. All right, cool. We got umami chillwave cray, which I think is right. Yep, umami chillwave cray. Obviously. Cool. Thank you. Nicely done. Any questions about these? Yeah, Max.
Can you go over again the second element? And
Yeah. So for the second element, we did this thing. So query selector all with dot post. That returns everything that matches dot post. That is everything with the class of post. And you can see some square brackets right here, which usually indicates an array. Whoever's beeping, could you make sure you turn your sound off? Cool, thank you. So this is basically an array, and so like an array, you can get things out of it the exact same way. And so this is taking the thing with the first index, that is the second thing in it. Does that answer your question?
that's why there's the all, because you're taking everything and then locating it.
Exactly. Yep. So query selector will just return the very first thing with the class of post. Query selector all will return every single thing with the class of post. Yep. Yeah,
I
Kyra?
have a question because at first I made the mistake of not putting all at the end of that one.
Mhm.
So out of curiosity, I don't know if it's ever a case of it. If we wanted to do something like, say, for example, we wanted within that first element a child of that,
Mhm.
would it be instead of all just selector dot post and then an index? So that just when I did
Yeah.
it came back to me undefined. So I guess that means that it could
Well,
target something.
no, you can't do this because it's not an array. It's just query selector is just going to return the element itself. And the element's not an array, so you can't use square brackets after it. Query selector all does return an array, so you can use square brackets after it. But query selector will always just return one element. Bless you.
Okay.
It'll always return one element, or if the thing doesn't exist, it's going to return null.
Okay.
Any other questions about that? All right, cool. So moving right along, we're going to get into jQuery. We already talked about what a library is. We already basically talked about what jQuery is. So now let's talk about how to set up jQuery. So go ahead and go back to this blog thing that you cloned down. So here's my blog. I'm going to cd into that, and I'm going to open it in Atom. And the way this looks when you cloned it down is if you go to the index.html, it should look something like this. You'll notice that in this JS folder over here that you also cloned down, there is already jQuery right inside it. So first thing I want to point out is the difference between these two jQueries. So here's jQuery number 1. It looks like, well, it is a lot of code. It's like, okay, almost 10,000 lines of code. But, you know, it's JavaScript. And then there's this one. So they're the exact same code. They do the exact same thing. The difference is this version, notice it has .min in the name. That stands for minified. But you'll also hear compressed or uglified because it's really ugly. And so what they did is they took this one right here, and then they removed basically all of the spaces from it. I mean, you can see that this entire thing is 2 lines, which are really long lines. They removed all of the spaces from it. They shrunk down the variable names to 1 letter if they possibly could. Same for the function names. Basically, they just scrunched it down as much as they possibly could so that it takes up less memory. If I look at this on here, I can see that the regular version of jQuery is about 250 kilobytes, and the minified version of jQuery is 84 kilobytes. So that's a pretty sizable difference. Again, they do exactly the same thing. There's no difference in terms of what the code does. It's just one loads a lot faster. Yeah?
I definitely come across that when I inspect sites and I really want to learn how they did something.
Mm-hmm.
So is there any way to take that and not uglify it so I can learn from what they're doing?
So maybe, but honestly, the thing about this stuff is like you can go poke around in the jQuery source code if you want, but this is pretty complicated stuff. And so that brings up one thing that we talked about briefly in that JavaScript debugging class we had a while ago. Every once in a while, you'll get an error, and the point in the code it'll point to for where the error happened is like right here. And it's like, holy crap, what do you do when it tells you the error is in something like this? The answer is you do not try to fix it. That's because the error probably isn't in this code at all. It's something that your code caused a while ago that somehow just triggered an error in this code. But really the problem is, no disrespect, in what you wrote. And you can be pretty confident that jQuery is like about as good as it's gonna get. It's about as perfect as it's gonna get. That's because there are hundreds of developers all contributing to jQuery, all working on it, very like seasoned developers who have lots of tests in place to make sure that jQuery is working really well. So if there was some sort of bug in it, they probably would have found it. So if you do get some sort of an error, don't try to go in and fix jQuery because you're going to have a really, really difficult time of it. Instead, just go and look through your own code. Going along with that, if you do see code like this on someone else's website, it's probably a library. So it's probably jQuery, or it might be underscore, or it might be Angular, or something else. In that case, I wouldn't bother trying to read through here because, again, it's like really complicated stuff. I would just try to figure out what library it is and then just read up on how to use that library. And you should be good from there. But yeah, I would really not recommend trying to go through all this. Yeah, Matt?
So how would you go about deciphering which library they use? Like, where they have dollar signs, selectors, so you would see dollar signs in this, and how would you say the artist jQuery?
So pretty much every time you see something like this, you're going to be able to just go into, you can just look at the source code of the page. I'm not going to do it right now. But you can just look at the source code of the page, and it'll probably be a file called like jQuery 2.4.1 or whatever, and you're like, oh, okay, it's jQuery. If you don't see that for some reason, like 99 times out of 100, you will. But if you don't, then there will almost certainly be a comment at the top like this saying what it is with a link to the license and some other information about it. So I would say look for one of those two things. If you don't see either of those, so I'll bet actually if I go to the General Assembly website, they have probably scrunched it all down. You don't need to do this because I really have no idea what's going to happen. Well, so here's one thing. I think this is all like Google Analytics stuff though. But let's see. They have a lot of crap in here. Yeah. Okay, no, there's Modernizer. Well, actually, so one thing about Rails is Rails uglifies your code for you, and the site is built on Rails. So if you really do want to go through here and decipher it, honestly, I'm not really sure what you should do. But whatever it is they're doing, they probably sort of like took from somewhere else anyway. So I don't know. I would just sort of leave it alone.
Question. So
Yeah.
the sign for being smaller, do people do that as well so people can't read their code?
Yes and no. So there is this thing called Obfuscating Code, which is where basically it just makes your code even uglier than it already looked with that uglifier. But you can always de-obfuscate it. That's because your computer still has to be able to read the code, right? So you can make it sort of inconvenient to figure out what it does, but now there are lots of things that de-obfuscate it. So here, let me show you an example. This isn't really relevant to what we're doing in class, but just because it's kind of fun, I'm going to make a say hi method, alert, sup, Kyra. Okay, you're Kytra now, close enough. And then I'm going to look for a JS obfuscator. JavaScript obfuscator. Holy crap, what is all this? It used to be a much simpler one. Okay, here we go. All right, so there that is. And now if I obfuscate it, it turns it into this. All that stuff. I know, it looks terrible, right? But there are lots of sites that can de-obfuscate this stuff, and it's the exact same process. You just copy it, paste it, and then it like just decrypts it for you. So no, you can't really hide your JavaScript from other people. You can make it a little inconvenient, but you can't hide it. And you can see that like everything I wrote is already in here. Like there's your name, Kaitra. Yeah, so your JavaScript is never going to be private. Your JavaScript is never going to be like proprietary, really. Anyone can come along and snag it in the exact same way they can with your CSS. If you really want to do private coding stuff, you have to do it all on the back end, which is what we're going to do after this week when we get into Ruby and stuff. Other questions about this? Okay, what was I talking about? How did I get on this? Oh yeah, setting up jQuery. That's what we're talking about. So if you go back to your index.html, to include jQuery on this site, all you do is you just include it like you would any other script, any other JavaScript file. You just use script tags, and then the path from your index.html to the JavaScript file. So in this case, that would be the JS folder slash jQuery 2.1.4.js. I'm going to use the unminified version for now. It doesn't really matter, but I'm just going to use the unminified version because I can. One thing that I want to mention right now, this doesn't have anything to do with jQuery, but when it comes to linking two things in your index.html, I saw some people using links like /users, /Robert Thomas, /desktop, /close enough, / whatever, /script.js. This is only ever going to work on your computer, as those of you who did this found out. That's because whenever anyone else tries to look at this, their computer is going to look for a users folder and a Robert Thomas folder and a desktop folder. And if they have it, it's kind of creepy, and odds are they don't have a Robert Thomas folder. So it's important to do a relative path. A relative path means how you would get from your index.html to whatever the thing is, whether it's an image or a script or CSS, whatever. So in this case, it would just be JS/jQuery 2.1.4.js. But this is an important thing, using relative paths. That's an important thing to be able to do. Once you have that done, you should be able to open this up in your browser. So I'm opening up that index.html. Oh, I already had it open. Look at that. Whatever. And you'll know you have jQuery working if you type just the $, and you get this. If you get something other than that that doesn't mention jQuery, then you do not have jQuery on your site, and you need to go back and fix it. But that's really it. You're just linking to it like you would any other JavaScript file, just with script tags. Anyone having trouble getting it to show up?
It's something different than you.
Yeah, so if it wasn't linked properly, one thing you might get is something that Chrome does that really bothers me. Are you getting something like this?
Yes.
Yeah, so jQuery uses that $sign thing a lot. Chrome has its own built-in $sign function, which has nothing whatsoever to do with jQuery. I don't really know why it's in there. It's like some sort of a debugging tool. If you get this and it doesn't say anything about jQuery, whoops, it is the wrong thing. This is not jQuery. If it is jQuery, it'll actually say something about jQuery. So if you're getting this, you need to go back to your index.html and make sure it's linked properly in here, and also make sure you have the right index.html open in your browser. And then when all that's done, you should be able to get this guy. So let's say if it still isn't working, then plan B is to use what's called a CDN, or a content delivery network. So this is using jQuery just downloaded right onto my computer. Another way of doing it would be to, like I said, use a CDN. So there's a site called cdnjs.org. I haven't seen that before. All right, whatever. And it basically is a site that has a whole bunch of different JavaScript libraries on it. You can see that it has just over 1,800 different JavaScript libraries. There are a lot of JavaScript libraries. I was telling Brittany before this class that there there's this thing called JavaScript library golf, where you just think of a word and then see if there's a library for it, because probably there is. Like pineapple.js, or MacGyver.js, or spatula.js. If it's a word, there's probably a JavaScript library named after that word. But the one we're dealing with here is jQuery. If we wanted to do Angular or whatever, we could find it in here as well. When you go to this site, you're going to get a link like this. And then, to use their jQuery, instead of the one downloaded onto your computer, all you do is you just copy a link like this and paste it right here. You don't need to do this. I'm just demonstrating this right now so you know that it exists. And then, if I refresh this page and hit $, well, no, that is jQuery actually, but it's the minified version, so it looks a little bit different. There we go. There's jQuery. So these are two different ways of putting jQuery into your project. It's basically the exact same jQuery. It's not like one jQuery has lots of features and the other one doesn't. They're both still jQuery. So any thoughts as to why we might choose one or the other of those two methods? Matt?
You don't want to host the whole file inside of your zip file.
Mhm. Yeah, that's one reason. It's 250 kilobytes. I don't have to put on my server. 250 kilobytes I don't have to worry about. Yeah.
I just have a question that's kind of related to that. So when you pull from someone else, does it also pull from their actual code? So like you said, pineapple or something like that. If I pull their jQuery, then does that mean that I'm using the base of whatever they put into their?
You're just using whatever JavaScript is at this link. So if I go here in my browser, I can see exactly what JavaScript I'm using. It's all this stuff. So this is the code I'm using.
So basically, if you're using someone else's code, then that's when you will put that in there when it's not your own.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So what are some other reasons why we might want to do one or the other? John, are you raising your hand?
I was just wondering, so when you store it on your machine, it'll send it from your machine, but if you use a CDN,
Mm-hmm.
will your machines pull it from the CDN first and then send it to the client, or will the client be able to see that it's a CDN and then pulls the jQuery straight from the CDN? Well, I don't know, but that's something you could probably configure, but I was just wondering how it works behind the scenes. You see what I'm saying?
I'm not entirely sure I see what you're saying, but this pretty much goes straight from the CDN to the client. It's just like, linking to someone else's image. You don't store it on your server or whatever. No, it's just like using an image from Imager or Picasso.
Could it end up being a problem if with whatever, let's say their server is down or the link is broken or something like that?
It could absolutely be a problem, because if their server is down, like if I'm using this, CDN.js Cloudflare thing and their server blows up, then suddenly I am out of one jQuery and my users aren't going to be able to use it. So yeah, if their server goes down, then that's one reason why you wouldn't want to use it. That said, usually the people hosting CDNs like this one have very, very reliable servers. I've never had a situation where the server went down. So this is just one CDN. There's like Google has its own CDN for jQuery and Angular and some other things. There's a site called MaxCDN. There are a couple other big CDNs, and they all are very reliable. I mean, technically anything could be a CDN. I could put jQuery on my own server, just used to host my little site, and I could call it a CDN. But I'm not 100% confident in how reliable my server is.
Could you copy and paste theirs, or more than likely they probably have some sort of files that's linked or something that if you copy and paste it to your own link file and drop it into yours, it probably won't work.
No, it probably will work. They don't care. I mean, yeah, sure. I can copy and paste this all I want, and there's nothing they can do to stop me. I can copy and paste that and save it. I can download this file if I want. But then, it's right back to where I was before. It's hosting it on my computer. So hosting it on what I usually do is when I'm developing stuff, I will leave jQuery on my computer, and I'll just use the version on my computer. That's because when I'm developing, I like to go really fast. I don't want to wait to download that 250 kilobytes from wherever, even though it takes 1/10 of a second. I'm really impatient. And if if my Wi-Fi craps out or something, then I won't be able to access jQuery if I'm using a CDN. If it's on my computer, I can keep using it, no problem. But once I actually go into a development environment, a production environment, so when I actually publish this thing, then I'm probably going to use the CDN. That's because every time your browser loads a JavaScript file, a CSS file, an image, or any sort of media, it caches it, which means it saves a version of it on your computer. Lots of people use this exact same link. And so every time your browser sees this link, it's going to use the version of it that was stored on your computer. And it's not actually going to load it all over again. So that can be a pretty nice thing, is if everyone is using the exact same link for this stuff, then your site's going to go a little bit faster because their browsers aren't going to have to load the thing all over again. They'll have a cached version. In the end, it doesn't really matter. We're talking about a difference of a gazillionth of a second. So it's just my personal preference to do it this way when I'm developing and to use a CDN when I'm publishing. Any questions about that?
Switch it out.
Yeah, usually. But I don't know. Oftentimes I forget and it doesn't really matter.
And so if you switch it out, are you switching out to someone else's code? Or do you turn yours into a CDN?
Well, technically, yeah, you are sort of turning yours into a CDN.
Okay.
Like if I push this thing up to GitHub, actually, you know what? I could just go to this right now and go in here, and then any one of you could go to this JS file right here, and you could use this link as a CDN if you want. You can say that's a CDN. And it's the same thing if I push my own jQuery up there to robert.aka.robin.com, you could say that's a CDN. Kind of a crappy CDN. I wouldn't actually use it as one, but you could. Any other questions?
I'm just wondering about version. Are there any things in jQuery that break previous versions? Say if you create, you know what I mean? So if you use one version and then change it,
Yeah.
when publishing to a newer version, would that potentially?
Probably not. So there are three main versions of jQuery, 1, 2, and 3. The only difference between them is that, some newer ones may have some more advanced features, but no, this, what's the word for it? Backwards compatibility is always really important. If you make something and then someone upgrades this thing that you made and suddenly everything breaks, and that thing that you made kind of sucks. That's one reason why HTML is so weird, is because it's trying to be backwards compatible for the past 20 years. It's trying to make sure that everything that worked 20 years ago still works. And people who are doing that with jQuery are trying to do the same thing. So the difference between I don't know what the difference between jQuery 3 and 2 is. I know the difference between 2 and 1 is that 1 works on Internet Explorer 8 and down, and jQuery 2 does not. But that's pretty much it. So if you're developing sites for old people who are using, Internet Explorer Stone Age or whatever, you're probably going to want to use jQuery 1. But if you're not developing for old people, then jQuery 2 or 3 is going to be fine.
Is it sensitive like the JavaScript where I know sometimes you can put it in the script in the header, or you can put it in the body?
Hold that
and
thought.
it'll
We'll talk
show-
about that. We'll talk
Okay.
about that. Max, did you have a question?
If it's not off topic, can you talk just a little bit about building a library or creating a library?
Yeah, sure. I showed you that L thing, that little L function I wrote before to use instead of document get element by ID. That's really it. You could say that technically any JavaScript you write is a library. If someone else uses it, then they achieve the same functionality that you have. I mentioned that whenever I'm making a web page, I usually have my own little helper functions. So on my I need a prompt website, you can see that there's this, where is it? There's a whole helpers thing in here somewhere. Yeah, I have this whole helpers chunk right here on my Robert aka Robin site. I have yet another helpers chunk right here. Help. Yeah, there it is. And there's that L function I was talking about. And so I realized that I was repeating this code an awful lot. I use basically this exact same code in everything I do. So eventually I just made my, now I just push it up to GitHub. I don't remember what link it's at, but I'm effectively making my own library. I'm the only one using it, but I'm effectively making my own library. I mean, really, you can say any JavaScript you write can be used as a library. This is some libraries are much more widely used and more formal than others. Okay, I'm going to introduce what you're doing next, and then we are going to take a break. Well, actually, now we've been going for a while. Why don't we take a break now, and we'll come back at 3:30. Let's do that.